legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Listen without limits. Unchain your brain. Change your thinking. Change your life. legalizefreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guests today are Colin E. Davis and Melissa Murray. Beginning in August 2020, Freedom from Fear is a free-form discussion series taking the title as its starting point. In this episode, Colin and Melissa contrast the evolutionary role of fear with the 21st century explosion in anxiety, neuroses, and declining mental health. We examine mainstream media fearmongering and propaganda, and how our modern obsession with safety and security renders life joyless, restricted, and forever in limbo. We also discuss the proliferation of fear in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and ask, is freedom from fear actually desirable, or even possible? Hi guys, Colin, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us again today, legalizefreedom.com. We do something a little bit different today. It's part of a sort of informal series I began a few months ago. It's entitled Freedom from Fear, and it's a free-form chat just taking the title as its starting point. Before we get into our discussion, just tell listeners a little bit about your work in general. Now, you're both musicians as a whole, very, very important dimension to your lives there. But there's part of your work that you do that I think is particularly relevant. The shadow tech work I think is particularly relevant to our topic today.
Yeah, hi Greg. Thanks for having us.
Hi Greg, thanks again. It's always great to have conversations with you.
Yeah, it's true. We're both musicians, and we're both metal musicians, and we also are esotericists. We consider ourselves to be alchemists, which is basically like the way we use the term is sort of a fancy term for people who are doing psycho-spiritual work on themselves and taking it incredibly seriously. We do have a book that you mentioned, Shadow Tech, Cracking the Codes of Personal and Collective Darkness, and a big subject that we work with and talk about is the shadow of the psyche, the dark side of the human mind, and its influence on us personally and collectively. And that book is sort of an exploration, sort of a systems-based exploration of the dark side of reality, or of human reality. And so there you go.
I would also say that we've both been on individually, and then since we've been together, our own investigation into evil, and what is evil, how does it work in the psyche,
right.
how is it affecting the collective consciousness of all humanity. A lot of people, when they investigate evil or the dark side, they get sucked into it instead of viewing it as more of science, archaeology.
Yeah, it's easy to start to project and to mythologize and get all sucked into it personally, yes.
Okay, well, I think this is number 6 in this series I've been doing, and pretty much all of them have started out, not intentionally, but kind of by default, considering what the role of fear has been in human evolution, really, in the human journey and story. It goes right back to, as far back into history as we can really look. And it seems that fear is really about survival initially. Mm-hmm. It's an animal instinct, fight or flight, which is meant to help the animal, whether human or otherwise, deal with immediate, physical threats. And it's an important mode to be able to move into in order to act. Now, fear can be paralyzing. Of course, it can be overwhelming, but that initial jolt of fear is meant to bring to our attention, there's something right in this moment and present right in front of us that's threatening, and we need to attend to it right now, or we may die. Everything else can wait. But of course, as the hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution have gone by, our situation has changed. But fundamentally, that's what it's about. It's a survival instinct.
Right. You got it.
Yeah. I think that ultimately it's an evolutionary instinct, because you can see it in biology and in animals that they evolve through that survival instinct, through the fear itself. It has a natural evolutionary pull, right? The strong survive, so to speak.
Well, I think you stated it. I think it's everything we all basically know about fear is that, yes, it's a biological instinct, and basically whatever is destructive to the organism, whether it's heat, whether it's the sound of an animal, a predator, or the sound of an avalanche, or whatever it is, over long periods of time, we learn what these potentially dangerous signals are, and then there is a fight or flight response, like you said, in your body, in your physiology, and you get the hell out of there. And it's pretty basic. But it is the one thing I would add to that is this.
Just somebody going by. Some guys, there's been a guy riding up and down all day on a chopper, so just ignore him.
Yeah, I heard that right when we started.
That's what he did.
That's what he did. Okay, so fear is one. So when you have a fear response, and you notice that it starts to. You start to feel it, and you tense up, and you start to get anxious, and you start to have thoughts and feelings, and all this starts to come up. What you want to do is you basically people have different reactions. Like you have, they have fight, they have flight, and they have freeze or whatever, and you have to just basically do everything you can to use your higher cognitive functions in that moment to try to assess the situation in the highest, most rational perspective possible, and then you have to kind of override your natural instinct to whatever is. It's a completely subjective thing, and everybody deals with this response differently. And people go into military training, and they are trained how to override their fear response so that they can have a huge amount of stress going on, and then they can still be performing their task. And I think that's kind of something. It's something you naturally learn to do as you grow up in the world, but it's also something you have to keep on working with over time. And like with any kind of physiological, psychological response that's inbuilt, that's biological, and you have to constantly be assessing your body's reaction to the world and trying to make higher level decisions, even when they're in conflict. And sometimes the body is telling you exactly what to do, get the hell out of there, and other times the body is not telling you what the smartest thing to do is. And so this is just something that we're all constantly dealing with.
I would also, this changes the subject a little bit,
yeah.
But getting back to what the work that we've been doing, which is in our internal state with post-traumatic stress trauma responses.
Yeah, right.
Which become cyclical, and they humanity in general has cyclical trauma response that has been passed on, I feel, and others, scientists and psychologists have been exploring this, that these responses get stored in our epigenetic system.
Yeah.
That this trauma, because of the fact, on one hand, it's a way to evolve. It's an evolutionary response, because if you have a fear that comes to you and you respond in a way that gets you out of that situation and you survive, then that helps the species evolve. The problem, I think, that where we are at this point is that our fear response is connected to epigenetic trauma individually and collectively.
Yeah, it seems like civilization itself traumatizes people to some degree. We all sort of have a low-level PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. We kind of have this low-level PTSD anyway. Most people do. And so then that already, then that's sort of a low-level underlying state of anxiety that you're already in. And then when the environment seems to become dangerous, then you're more on the edge. But I want to ask you, Greg, about the whole thing, freedom from fear. I don't think we want freedom from fear. I don't think we want freedom from the biological reaction. What do we want freedom from? What are we searching for? What do we want freedom from?
No, you're exactly right. The title itself was intended to be once something that would feel inviting. People go, oh, yes, I'd like to find out what that is, but also to maybe a little bit provocative. Because, a couple of guests have certainly said, well, we'll never be free from that. We don't want to be. And I was reading Carl Jung on fear, and he speaks about not, I'm paraphrasing here, but like a man free from fear is on the edge of the abyss, as a really bad place to be. But he spoke about not denying fear, but not succumbing to it.
Sure.
So that's really the key. So that's a main dimension of it. So, but also what we consider to be fearful in this day and age. And I mention in each of these interviews, the word anxiety has come up. For a lot of people, they talk about fears and they're afraid of this and afraid of that. And it doesn't really qualify for me as a fear. I'm afraid of the first day of my new job, or I'm afraid of stepping out of my comfort zone.
Oh, that qualifies as a fear. Oh,
well,
totally.
Well, it depends on the circumstances, but what I'm saying is I see a lot of neuroses in our species these days that really in another age would have seemed trivial. I think we have a lot of so-called fears in modern society that I personally feel don't justify the name. Do you see what I mean? I think you have to then think about what definitions, what does fear mean? What is a fear? And you can then say, well, it can be entirely subjective. What makes one person really, really fearful for another person would qualify as anxiety, and for another person would qualify as a walk in the park. It's nothing. So,
right.
So yeah, there's a lot to break down there, and it is absolutely not black and white. But during the last year, particularly with the pandemic, anybody listening to this in 2030 or 2040, we're speaking now in 2021. I just saw all these very much heightened levels of anxiety and fear. And I wanted to just think about what is it that we're afraid of? What are we anxious about? What's serving us? What do we need to be afraid of? What's productive? What's beneficial? What's actually harming us in these responses potentially? So it was really just about having a conversation around that. But you're absolutely right. This idea of being fearless. I mean, I get to quote Jung again. He said, "A fearless man is a Superman." I don't like Supermen.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's almost like freedom from neuroticism, maybe freedom from hysteria, freedom from irrationality, and as far as with the pandemic, it seems like, okay, I'm in America, and there seems to be a pretty clear split between the people who are afraid of the virus and people who are not afraid or afraid minimally. And it's not incredibly clear, but it seems to be that the white collar types, the intelligentsia types, the academic types, the politicos, and the people who work in offices and in the industries, matrix people. I mean, I guess everybody's a matrix person, but people who are in these jobs where they work with their minds less than they do with their hands and their bodies. These people, these college-educated people, and these people who are in that domain, they're the most fearful. The people who are in the upper class, upper middle class. As you get down into the pure middle class people, the working people, the plumbers, the carpenters, the roofers, the people who are just really working with their hands and closer to the ground, the people who every day they put themselves into dangerous positions, right? Every day they could possibly step on a nail, something could hit them in the head, cut off a finger with a saw. These people are less fearful of the virus.
Generally, that's true. I think that there's a disconnect in people who work in technology and all, is a disconnect from nature.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
From the earth. Our ancestors, even 100 years ago, were out on the ground, working with their hands in the dirt. They also were experiencing death firsthand. They saw dead bodies. They understand what death is. I think we're very...
people that are hunting, people that are slaughtering animals, people that are farming animals, they're very close to death, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, a lot of this fear and the hysteria comes from a fear of death itself.
Yeah, that's the sort of primal, right, you got it. It's the sort of at the base of it all. Yeah,
well, I was probably going to get to that later on, but that's come up every single time I've had one of these discussions, because that's at the root of it, I think, is our view of the world, of ourselves, our place in it, our view of the larger cosmos, and just fear of dying. So that's where it comes, that's where it stems from, not the primal fear that we spoke about, just about, that you're had to climb up a tree to get away from a lion, and you were lucky to survive. But this kind of generalized angst, this unspoken shadow, that hangs over people for their whole lives, and that then feeds into these situations that come along, like the pandemic, and like all the messaging about, every 5 minutes you're going to die, and and just the terror of that, in all play, that creates just immense mental strain.
Yeah, there's an ongoing. You could see it like Paul Levy does. He sort of refers to the collective shadow of mankind as a virus, and it's like any shadow material like fear or any shadow material really, when you have a lot of people collectivizing around an idea, right? And every time you have these mass hysterias, like you had in Europe in before the World Wars, and you have these collective events where there's some idea that the communists are under every rock, or the Jews are going to get us, or the terrorists are going to get us, or the virus is going to get us. Everybody sort of collectivizes around this idea, and then they share their shadow material amongst each other, and it just builds in power. And then you get mass hysteria, and then you just get this thing where it's just feeding on itself, and then everybody's tuning into the news to find out to get the, to figure out where they are in terms of, where they are with their life and their death. Where are they with this whole thing? And everybody gets addicted to to the proliferation of the hysteria. We get conscripted into the hysteria, and so at some point it just becomes this unconscious, reactive, hysterical movement through the population, and we see that happening. And you see all there's so many. If you really just looked at this virus thing with an objective, rational viewpoint, and you just looked at it and said, okay, what are my chances of dying? Even if you take the official numbers and all that, and it's like for the average person, it's like 1 in 3,000 or whatever it is. It's like, okay, what are my chances of dying in an auto accident? Well, during the course of your life, it's like 1 in 100 or something. So it's completely irrational, but people are sucked into it. They become addicted to it. It takes them over. And so they don't go look at what the numbers are. But then, let me just add one more thing. Also realize, though, that we're inside of a Pavlovian type of experiment. This is a black magic trick that's being played on us. So, you have the level of the people getting hysterical and all of this reaction and all of this, but then you also have a level of individuals, a group of individuals who know exactly what they're doing, and they're running an op on us.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect too. It's not just an organic thing that just kind of appeared. It was put on us, and sometimes things are organic. You have a volcano might be starting to erupt, and what are we going to do? Or a hurricane's coming, and everybody starts acting irrationally and all that. But then you have these concerted operations, these particular operations, and you go all the way back to Rome or whatever, and trying to scare the Romans that Carthage was about to attack them, to get them to do what they wanted, or at the church, or what the war on terror or whatever. And so people's fear and their tendency to become hysterical, and then to form these hysterical movements. These things we get played. We're getting played.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of it. It's not just an organic movement.
I think that's really important part of waking up from being controlled by your own fear is understanding that there are external people and systems that are mind controlling the public, using their fear to direct them into a situation that they profit from in multiple ways. Mm-hmm. Now, what you can do as an individual, the more that you're aware of your own fear and you start to work on your individual fears and how they're operating in your own life, then you have a stronger mind.
Yeah, you build an immune system
that can withstand this external psychological mind control operation that's going on.
Yeah, this is the archetypal, the red pill, right? Right, where you realize, where you sort of, in our generation, the idea of the red pill that comes from the movie Matrix is the idea that you wake up to the fact that reality as you knew it, you thought it was just a big sort of accidental kind of just organic process of life and culture and society, and just things were happening, and then you wake up to the fact that no, there are active parasitic elements. Right now in the movie The Matrix, it was like some machine race that was basically farming human beings, but that's a metaphor for the way societies are organized. And they're organized in a fashion where people are manipulated, they're coerced, they're propagandized, and this is part of how societies are organized. And you wake up to this sort of darker side of civilization, and you have to go through this whole process of trying to unwind it and go, well, wait a minute. I thought this was caused by this, and now I'm finding out it was caused by that. And, I was thinking that this was a real thing, but now I'm finding out that it's kind of a collective mythology. It's not really a real thing. And who's pulling these strings, and how is this working?
And that's a fear in itself.
It invokes, it does. You get all kinds of anxiety, and then you have to go through this sort of unwrapping of the onion, and everybody is, just does it in their own way and comes to their own conclusions, but you kind of have to unwrap your worldview. But as you do this, you might fall into the trap of becoming paranoid that now there's some, Illuminati or whatever, and that you're being tracked. And I remember this CIA technology called voice-to-skull technology. You can find it from like the 70s or whatever, where they could beam voices into your heads. And I've met people who think, oh yeah, they're beaming voices into my heads, and they go to the paranoid side of things. And so then you just replace one fear for another fear. Or, maybe you were living in bliss before in the Garden of Eden, and now you've awakened, and you are now, you're now living in a world of fear. So the thing about red pilling and unwinding all of this is, the idea is that it should bring you to a higher state of awareness of how the world works, to actually help you to not be fearful in ways where that's being used against you, or in ways that is completely irrational. But you're never going to turn off fear as a biological response. But what you definitely want to do, and what the whole red pill initiation is about figuring out that there are mechanisms to use fear against you, to organize you to act in this or that manner,
to control you and make you feel weak.
To enslave you, basically.
Yes.
And so if you wake up to that mode of operation that's going on around you, now you eliminate those sources of fear. You don't believe what TV is telling you anymore. Everybody's rushing out and getting an experimental vaccine, and you're sitting back going, I'm not afraid of that virus. I'm not, there's no need for me to do that, and I'm just chilling, kicking back. I'm not in fear because I woke up to this reality. And so it seems like, when you're talking about fear, it seems like being red-pilled is one of the things where at first you may fall into fear as you unwind it, but then eventually you sort of mature into that, and now you have freedom from fear.
That concludes part 1 of our interview. Part 2 will be available soon in the subscribers area at legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com